Last session, we explored how the post war social contract for science was dismantled by the ascendancy of neoliberal ideology. The move away from government funded basic research toward a more market driven model of research development and innovation created a new landscape. Today, we will examine the direct consequences of this shift, the decline of scientific consensus in the public sphere, and the rise of a new kind of research, one more directly subservient to political and economic interests. The post war social contract for science was built on an assumption of scientific consensus. The idea was that once experts arrived at a unified conclusion, for example, that smoking causes cancer or that CFCs destroy the ozone layer, policymakers would act on that knowledge. This was the foundation of the technocratic state, as we discussed in a previous video. However, in the neoliberal era, consensus became a problem rather than a solution. When a powerful industry or political faction finds a scientific consensus inconvenient, it has a strong incentive to sow doubt. The goal is not to prove the consensus is wrong, but to create the appearance of a debate where absolutely none exists. This strategy is known as manufactured uncertainty. By funding a few dissenting voices or selectively promoting a small number of contrarian studies, these actors can delay regulations and policy changes that threaten their interests. No one has documented this process more powerfully than the historian of science, Naomi Oreskes. In her book, Merchants of Doubt, she and co author Eric Conway expose a small group of highly connected scientists who, for decades, worked on behalf of powerful industries to mislead the public on a range of issues. These merchants of doubt used a well rehearsed playbook honed first by the tobacco industry to deny the link between smoking and cancer. Later, they applied the very same tactics to sow confusion on issues like acid rain, the ozone hole, and most famously, climate change. They did so not by producing compelling new evidence, but by amplifying very minor disagreements and attacking the motives and character of mainstream climate scientists. This had the effect of confusing the public and policymakers, creating the illusion that the science was not actually settled when it always was. This brings us to a key shift in how science is conducted and funded. With the decline of robust, unencumbered government funding for basic research, scientists increasingly turn to private sector or politically motivated funding sources. This created an environment where research agendas are often shaped or increasingly shaped less by intrinsic curiosity and more by external pressures. This is the rise of policy oriented research, where the research question itself is framed in a way that aligns with the interests of the funder. A powerful example of this is seen in the fantastic work of Ben Franta, who has extensively documented the history of the fossil fuel industry's engagement with climate science. Franta's research reveals that companies like ExxonMobil didn't simply deny the science. In fact, they funded extensively high quality research on climate change in the 1970s and 1980s that often confirmed the fundamental, undeniable link between fossil fuels and global warming. However, as the consensus became more public and the threat of regulation loomed, the industry shifted its strategy. They began to fund research on very specific policy oriented topics, such as the efficacy of different climate models or the potential for technologies like carbon capture to solve the problem. Magic bullets that don't actually work. The goal was to reframe the debate away from the need for a transition to renewable energy and toward technological fixes that would allow them to continue business as usual. This was not a simple case of lying about the science. Instead, it was a sophisticated form of influence where research was strategically used, altered, and modified to support a political and commercial agenda. The rise of policy oriented research and the strategic undermining of consensus have profound effects on scientific authority. When scientists appear to be in constant disagreement often amplified by political and media interests, their collective authority as a trusted source of knowledge is eroded. The public may begin to see all scientific claims as just another opinion, indistinguishable from any other partisan talking point. This also forces scientists into a new role. Instead of being independent seekers of knowledge, they are now often placed in the position of being advocates, forced to defend their findings in public and political arenas. This can blur the line between science and politics in the public's mind, further contributing to a sense of disconnection and distrust. The period we are discussing marks a deep, fundamental transition from a time when scientific authority was built on consensus and public funding to a time when it's fragmented and contested. This decline in consensus is not a natural part of the scientific process at all. It is a strategic outcome of a new relationship between science and power, where economic and political elites in a fragmented landscape have the incentive and the means to create doubt when it is in their interest to do so. This this sets the stage for our final exploration of influencer intellectuals and the new media environment, which amplifies this dynamic to an even greater and more dangerous degree.